The Accelerator Podcast is here. I'm your host on tap, Monty King, inviting you to leave ordinary in the dust. Every next level of our lives demands a better version of ourselves. Our guest will inspire you to close the gap. What doesn't happen by design happens by default, so the content on tap is created for listeners to learn and grow. Visit us online at whatsontap.tv or find us on your favorite podcast platform. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, tap 5 stars and drop us a review. Hit the notification bell to never miss an episode and share your favorites to help others outrun the status quo. Let's get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Accelerator Podcast. I'm your host on tap, Monty King, and I'm excited to have my good friend Horatio Neely of Neely Behavioral Health. And Horatio is on a mission to reduce driver burnout and transform the lives by breaking mental health stigma for commercial truck drivers all across this country. Horatio, you amazing human being. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
Doing very well, Monty. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming on. I'm excited to get started. But first, let's talk about Neely Behavioral Health. Tell us a little bit more about what it is that you're doing and how you're doing it.
Well, Neely Behavioral Health, we offer programs through our Neely Counseling Center as well as Neely EAP. So on the counseling side, we provide one-on-one counseling, either face-to-face or via video or remotely. And also we provide our employee assistance program. So we support local state and government agencies, as well as the private sector, especially when we talk about the transportation space as well.
So give us a little bit more of your background and what led to the focus on the transportation industry, specifically our drivers.
Wow. So at the top of 2000, I worked for a company called HEB. It's a trucking company, one of the largest grocery companies here in Texas. And essentially, they have their own private distribution of their groceries through their warehouses and so forth. So I worked on the transportation side, and I quickly could tell that there was a gap in reference to how drivers were perceived and the level of support that they were getting at the driver level. I worked with HEB for about 5 years, and then I transitioned to a company called Gulf States Toyota, which is now U.S. Auto Logistics. So I always tease I went from moving groceries to moving cars. And it's the exact same. The driver profile is exactly the same, whether you're moving groceries or if you're in a car hauling industry. That level of stress, the level of support that they need is even greater because the jobs are just really, really intense on both sides.
So when you talk about the perception of the support for the drivers, that's one side of it, right? But then it's how the drivers perceive that, right? So can you speak a little bit to the driver side on how that impacts them?
Yeah, big time, because drivers is just often it's like, hey, I'm just a driver, right? And, often I would come in contact with drivers who actually should have a college degree or very academically savvy, very sophisticated, and they just chose to drive because they wanted their own level of independence. So a lot of times drivers felt boxed in because the support looked at them as just a regular blue collar worker, not as someone who was really a professional driving a heavy duty piece of equipment.
So can you recall or take us back to maybe the moment where something happened with a driver that caused you to say, whoa, something's got to change?
Wow. Instantly I think about a bread run. I had a driver who was normally on a run. We call it a bread run because they have about 5 or 6 different stops. And he came into the office and dispatch and he said, hey, I'm really not feeling it today. And dispatcher quickly discounted him and said, hey, you either take this load or go home, and of course, a lot of times financially from a driver perspective, they're not the best money managers, right? So Often they may live check to check. And so when you give them that threat, take this load or go home, typically they're going to take the load, right? Because they don't want to fear to lose the job and, of course, losing the compensation as well. This particular driver really was not feeling it. And he had a good track record. So I knew something was going on in his life. So that was one where I overheard that conversation and quickly got involved and intervened and spent some time with him. And of course, once you spend time with someone one on one and get a chance to peel back the onion, you realize he was having some personal issues. And, his mind was not in the right space to drive that particular day.
Mm. So whenever your mind's not in the right space, you're not really focused on what you're doing, right?
Yeah, pretty much. And of course, one distraction on the road for a driver could be, catastrophic. It could definitely, people could lose their lives or, it's just a bad situation for a driver.
So I've had some episodes where I've had people from involved in the litigation side of things,
Mm-hmm.
and we've had conversations about post-traumatic, the trauma from after an incident, and reintroducing a driver to
Whoa.
something, and their perception of what they thought happened was different whenever they were reintroduced to the actual video or whatever it was, right?
Right.
And that could be resetting or putting them right back into the moment, or I guess the trauma itself, to have an impact on their behavior, especially because most of the time that doesn't happen until could be years before they get reintroduced. So they've had time to suppress it and self-medicate, if you will, without speaking to someone. And we just sort of, it led me to the discussion about, well, if a company provides an employee assistance program through counseling, et cetera, what kind of impact should or could or would that have on a driver? And the response was, hey, that's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
This is something that should absolutely be available. So I wanted to I'll say all that to say and kind of pick your mind. There's obviously pre-accident and post-accident, right? But what are just some benefits for improving the wellness of not just the individual drivers, but even company employees? To your point earlier, the perception is not always reality, and that could have an impact either way, right? So can you speak on those benefits, if you don't mind, from both angles?
Yeah, no problem. The first thing that comes to mind when you talked about the post-accident process, right? Typically, when a driver is involved in an accident, what happens is that you go to drug alcohol testing, and you go through the process. You step them down so you can, get a chance to learn more about the incident. Typically, and I love the approach now, is that when you have a protocol that includes a debriefing with a counselor, you get a chance to allow that driver to not suppress that memory, but to get into that trauma and an opportunity to work through it so they can understand it a little bit more. Because typically, if you don't have that level of debriefing, you're just releasing that driver back into the wilderness, right? But I think one of the key benefits is whenever you introduce and you have some type of wellness program, you get a more complete person, right? Because whenever someone feels like they're not heard or they don't have an outlet, they tend to have that build up inside of them. They tend to walk around just like a pressure cooker, right? And so often in our environment, from a trucking perspective, you hear a lot of comedy, a lot of laughter, right? Because you have to laugh through these situations, because it's so intense. But can you imagine if you had that level of that spirit of freedom, that spirit of knowing that you can talk to everyone, knowing that you had an outlet? It takes the stress out of that bubble. I always tease, it takes the air out of the balloon, because it's so much pressure inside of that balloon, and that often it helps to just release and create an environment where everyone feels free to be themselves and feel free to express themselves as well.
And I would have to think that would increase production, right? You would become more efficient, more effective in what you're doing, and on a different level, right?
So, often, we get into our KPIs often, right? Because drivers hear efficiency, they hear productivity. And so I wouldn't say that I shy away from that all the time, but we try to not create these environments where you're just a machine.
Mm.
You're not on a production line. Yeah, we want efficiency, but I think healthy self-esteem, those things are naturally going to help drivers be more productive. It's naturally going to have them be more efficient. They're going to be participating in the fuel mileage and making sure that they're watching their fuel and doing everything that they need in order to make sure that the company is economically sound. Um,
Yeah, I've heard an analogy before that it's sort of like when you're in a pool and you try to lay on top of a beach ball in the water, right?
uh-huh.
You can only get it down so far, and then all of a sudden
Yeah, big
it's going to
time.
make waves. And the analogy was to that of, like, to your point, the stress or the trauma. You can only suppress it to the point to where it's eventually going to hit the surface. And it's about trying to be proactive and letting that rise up a little at a time to prevent the waves, right? Instead
Yeah.
of it just exploding. That's what I'm hearing you say, right? And for lack of a better term.
Yeah, I think one other things that makes companies more successful is when you look at a driver scorecard, right? Because you always have your company scorecard where you're looking at the big nuggets in reference to fuelage and mileage, and a lot of those components they trickle down to the driver. But imagine if a driver had an opportunity, they had health and wellness added to their scorecard where they participated in some type of wellness activity and it contributed from a positive perspective to the driver scorecard as well. Not just how many loads they ran per week or how many cars they moved per week. Making wellness a part of their scorecard as well.
So, what does it say to you when an employer adds a program like yours to their protocols? What's it tell you about that company, that employer, in your opinion?
Well, I would tell you that the companies that survey their drivers and they take time to get feedback from the organization and they realize that they have a healthy organization, they constantly illustrate and tell their driver population and support staff that they care. And because those are the companies that throughout this whole process of not being able to find drivers, the driver shortage, the companies that illustrate that they care about their workforce, those are going to be the successful companies. And through the driver network, that gets out there that, hey, go work for this company because they care about you. You're not just another number.
Have you seen with companies that you currently work with an impact on either their driver turnover or their driver retention?
Excellent. Yes, yes. Once again, when you talk about driver recruiting, you can publish all the ads, you can put the analytics out there and track them online. It's word of mouth. And so those successful companies, those drivers go out there and find other drivers that are a good fit for their organization that matches what they're trying to achieve, especially on the productivity side, the economics of the whole overall process. But they go out there and find drivers for you. So when you talk about driver retention, it's kind of embedded in that process as well, because once they realize that your benefits, okay, you have medical, okay, I have 401k, oh, I have a health and wellness program, EAP, what does it look like, right?
Mhm.
And I'm like, hey, I want to be a part of that company.
Awesome, awesome. So tell me about the couch time check-in. What is that?
Couch time check-in is really what we talk about. Physical health and mental health are on the same spectrum. And often, when we look at our physical health, we have certain systems in place to help support it. For instance, you have your annual physical. So each year, whether you're presenting any issues, you go get blood work and you get observed by your doctor. And so when we talk about going to the dentist, we get a cleaning probably every 6 months. I can go on and on about the physical components and systems that are in place, but what do we have in place for our mental health? And because that stress, that burnout, those are the intangibles. You can't actually see it. So the couch time check-in is an effort to say, hey, let's do an annual couch time. You may not be presenting any issues. You may not be angry, but let's sit down with a therapist and just give yourself an hour just to put everything out there. And after that hour, if you feel fine, hey, I'm good, doc. But after that hour, if you feel like, hey, I need to make some adjustments in my life, hey, I want to come back for a second session. Hey, I want to bring my family in. I think I need to talk about some serious things, because you never know until you have that moment. And so part of it is not waiting for the wheels to fall off. That's part of the physical, right? When you go get an annual check-in, high blood pressure. Okay, I'm diabetic. You pick up things at the annual physical. So whenever you do that annual couch time check-in, you have an opportunity to assess and look at some things that you're probably not talking about.
So it's sort of like a preventative maintenance program for your mental health.
I love it. Yes. Preventative maintenance.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Our industry is full of that, right? You want to, what does it say? Benjamin Franklin, ounce of prevention. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So is there anything else that you can tell us on how your programs support the employer and the driver that we haven't really touched on so far? Like, what are some other things that you can do to support?
The program is pretty comprehensive, because when you look at the driver, typically what we say with our program, it goes beyond counseling, because a lot of times whenever even the overall workforce here, employee assistance program, they think, hey, I don't want to go to counseling, right? But our program goes beyond that. We have what we call our legal and financial support, where drivers have free, and their family members have free access to a financial consultant as well as an attorney. Also, we have different programs like computerized CBT. With this new generation, a lot of times, if you can offer it on from a technical perspective, they can do it self-paced, or they can get involved in the cognitive behavior therapy process. It's called computerized CBT. We also have a program called Aware, which is a stress management program where you get paired up with a therapist and you can check in with them once a week or bi-weekly over a period of time just to talk through things. You don't necessarily have to go in and see a counselor. Just talk it out. Just talk to someone. We also have a nutritional wellness program where you have access to a nutritionist, a functional nutritionist, where you can call that person up and dial in from a remote session and just talk to your diet and look at your overall wellness from an eating perspective. We know a lot of times drivers, it's tough. It's a sedentary role, so it's tough to find good meals, but it also helps to have a wellness coach, someone that's out there that understands nutrition, understands what you do, and kind of give you a good game plan from a meal perspective.
So those are amazing solutions. So now I've got to hit you with, what's the problem? And really what I mean by that is, what is the stigma right now about commercial truck drivers?
In reference to participating in these services, or
just in general, how are they perceived, like we sort of talked about, or what is the reality for that matter to where there's a need for this mental health and wellness, and even physical, addressing the physical sides of it as well.
So I'll approach it from, looking at how we progress when you talk about currently how drivers go about with their CDLs, right? So when you talk about here recently, we've incorporated a level of fitness that's in there, because If you go to get your CDL and they realize that your blood pressure's up or you're diabetic, there's certain things now that you have to hit that threshold. They may not renew it for like a year or so. So from a government perspective, I think that it's on the radar physically.
Mm-hmm.
But when you talk about the psychology of it and you talk about wellness, I think there's a stigma associated with the costs, associated with purchasing or investing in that, and then understanding the need. A lot of times, when you look at personnel, you don't necessarily have to have a licensed professional counselor on board or someone that has a sociology or a therapist background, but it helps to already be aware that you need that type of support around your driver group, because I think there's a stigma that there's something wrong with my organization, there's something wrong with my driver population. So whenever you talk about the stigma of mental health, a lot of people naturally think there's something wrong, something's going on. And part of what we're trying to say, there's nothing wrong, you're healthy. That's part of the process, that's part of life. But you have to be able to extend those level of resources to support your organization.
Yeah, it sounds like it. A lot of it is just being aware. The awareness of this
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean, like you pointed out, that something is wrong, but you're aware that your equipment needs serviced every so often for a longer, better life, right? For the life of that equipment, and it's more of the awareness of, hey, we all have secrets, or we all have stress, or we all have whatever you want to fill in the blank with.
Right.
And it's pressure that we put on ourselves. Sometimes it's unnecessary. And just being aware that we all have that. It's always great to have an opportunity to, in a protected or safe place, be able to communicate that. And so it doesn't build up and then, back to my analogy, because it's how I remember it, explode out of the water like the beach
Explode
ball.
out the water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that awareness is huge.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Now, I was thinking as you were talking about from a support perspective, I think it's very important that companies invest in their frontline support. When you talk about the ratio of supervisors to drivers, right? Whether it's 1 to 30, 1 to 60,
Mm.
you'd be surprised around looking at those numbers of management supporting drivers and the level of support that you have, because those same services need to apply to them as well. Because what we've learned and what I know to be true is that when you talk about utilization rate of these type of services, the higher the utilization rate, the higher the participation of the frontline management team.
Mm.
So you have to be committed to training and educating your staff to be engaged, be aware what to listen for, how to
Mm.
get engaged with the driver mental health as well. Because often that staff, if they're not educated and trained on what to listen for and how to promote and say, hey, I call it a friendly referral, where, hey, we have an EAP program. Why don't you go talk to somebody? Or, hey, I notice, it's always something financial you've been talking about. Hey, we have EAP. You can talk to a financial consultant, right? So I think companies have to take the time to get their frontline support educated and trained on, what wellness looks like, and be able to bring in professionals to talk to them as well.
So if the leadership, or the owner, whoever's in the management, there's no buy-in there, the dispatchers probably aren't buying in, and they may be even triggering or making some of the stress worse on the drivers, right?
Yeah.
So it's got to be both sides of the coin, so to speak,
Yeah.
the inside and the outside, which I love. I think that's a fantastic approach. And again, it goes back to the awareness. Maybe dispatch isn't even really aware of what to look for, or that they're triggering something in the driver.
Ooh,
And
trigger. Yeah, trigger. And they know the triggers, right? For instance, dispatchers that especially have been in organizations for 20 plus years, they know the profile of their drivers. they know how to get them on that very difficult load, or how to get them out there. They know what makes them tick. So yeah, why not start with your dispatch team, giving them the tools and resources that they need.
I'm going to give a real life example that I have a friend that's on the inside, not this company anymore, but a long time ago. We were just talking in general, and a driver called him and was just kind of like, hey, I can't make it. I just can't go. And his response at that time was, you're a professional. Get your boots on, get out there and get this load delivered.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's not really his mentality as a human being.
Right.
But being in that environment and whatever it was, the pressure on him to make sure the drivers were doing what they needed to do. And now that we're talking about and having this conversation, it reminds me of that. So it's got to be prevalent in the industry. I mean, that's got to be a regular occurrence, which is unfortunate. And it goes back to the awareness. Some people don't know what they don't know.
Yeah, I laugh. I've heard that quite a bit. Hey, you're a professional. You're a professional driver. Okay, yeah, I get that. But you're right.
You signed up for this, right?
You signed up for this. That's what you do. That you're a driver, right? And I think that goes back to that driver back in the 70s and 80s. You get some no pills and whatever, however they needed to get through it. But a new generation where everything's electronic, where, the systems and the equipment is more sophisticated. And so I think just like we've made the investment in our equipment over a period of time, is making an investment in the personnel as well.
Love it. Horatio, let's transition to what I call the TAP 5.
Okay, let's do that.
This is going to be the 5 questions. You're not prepared, I'm sure, for this, so there's no wrong answer. But let's get started with number 1. What is the worst mental health advice you've ever heard or seen? I guess it would be a better way to put it. So, what have you, what have you seen or heard out there that you were like, whoa?
All I can say, hey, you'll be okay. Don't worry about it. If someone gets finished giving you the story, as I said, throwing up on you, telling you all something tragic, hey, you don't worry about it. You'll be okay.
That makes me. I don't even know what triggered this in my memory, but time heals all wounds, right?
Time. Yeah.
So on the flip side, what is the best mental health advice that you've ever heard or you've given?
Hey, I'm here to listen. I'm here. It's okay. You're in a safe environment. It's okay to be not okay. What do you need? And I think, and I've heard that more so now. It's okay not to be okay. Because a lot of times we have this stigma that, especially from a male perspective, that I'm okay. And so when you get some chinks in your armor, you're like, whoa, and that something is not right. And so it's okay not to be okay.
That's good. So take me back to teenage Horatio. What advice would you give your teenage self?
Wow. I think, so I was a military kid, so I went to 2 different two different junior highs and 2 different high schools. And biggest advice, I would just say continue to focus in school and have fun, not be so serious.
Were you a serious teenager?
Yeah, I was. It's pretty serious, because when you transition to different schools, especially high school, you have to be engaged, right? You got to figure some things out. So you have to keep your focus so you're not, my biggest thing in school back then was kids going off to alternative school. And the alternative schools then were tough. So you didn't want to, be in that bucket. So hey, let's stay focused. Do what you need to do.
Good. Got it. All right. So the next one, do you recall what the first CD you ever purchased was?
I want to say probably Guy I Like. It was called a song called I Like.
Yeah, I know
Guy.
that one. Sing some of it. Can you
Oh God,
I'm just
I
kidding.
like, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's one of my favorites. Yeah. So yeah, I remember all the CD world. Well, let's go back to cassettes. What was your first cassette player?
I know what mine was. What was yours? And I'll tell you what mine was.
Probably Eric B and Rakim.
Nice.
Yeah. What about
Mine
yours?
was my first cassette tape was Ray Stevens,
Okay.
and my first CD was the Monkees.
Oh, the Monkeys.
Yes.
Wow,
Wow,
that's
you
cool.
almost did their intro there. That was pretty good.
Yeah. Wow, that's cool.
All right. So, last question: who is the all-time greatest ever professional wrestler?
It's easy to go Ric Flair because he's made a resurgence lately. Uh,
Yeah.
I just saw something on Dusty Rhodes back in the day. I came out of the Mid-South, so I have to go with Jerry Lawler.
Oh, okay.
Jerry Lawler, yeah. Him
The
and Bill
King.
Dundee, yeah. The King, Jerry Lawler, yeah.
So, do you have a Jerry Lawler impression that you can give everybody?
No, I cannot. No, I cannot do that. Yeah.
All right.
Oh my
Hey,
God.
that if you come up with anything, let me know. But this has been awesome, Horatio. Tell everybody how they can get in touch with you if they've got other questions or are interested in some services, etc. How can our listeners reach out to you?
Yeah, so you can reach me at Horatio@neelycounseling.com. That's Horatio at NEELYCOUNSELING.com. Or you can go to our website at NeelyEAP.com, NeelyEAP.com.
All right. And you're on LinkedIn as well, I believe?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, Horatio Neely LinkedIn, and also Instagram and Twitter as well.
Awesome. Horatio, it's been a pleasure. I hope you come back and join us again soon. Be well, my friend.
Hey, awesome. Thanks for having me, Monty.
Thank you.